felt really vulnerable in that situation. There was a woman who was brought by, and we learned that she had been strip searched, and she was hunched over. She was tall and she had broad shoulders, but she was hunched over and she was in such obvious distress. And again, you know, I felt so helpless in a cage with my hands tied, and I know she's going to be dragged away to be locked in a cage herself, and it was pretty horrible. I myself required medication. That officer after officer told me that they couldn't find. One officer said that I was lying to get attention. They eventually did find it, and then I was told I needed to be in a separate cell in order to get my medication. So eventually I was taken to an isolation cell. By this time it's probably, I don't know, in the evening, early evening. And eventually I got my medication. Now I'm in a small cell that's probably 6 by 8. There's no bench, there's no toilet. It's still freezing cold. I still have nothing to eat or drink. And I start talking to the people who I can hear on either side of me. And then there's a woman beside me who says she's been shot with a rubber bullet and she's had her elbow checked. But then there's two other people who are not there for medical reasons, so we're starting to wonder if the medical, you know, why are we there if we're not, like, none of us really had a clear idea why we were in isolation. Suddenly the medical side story just didn't seem to fit together. And then the one thing that we found we did have in common is that we were all gay or lesbian, and that's, you know, and according to stereotypes, visibly so. One person had actually been told, we're going to put you in segregation for your own good, because the other prisoners wouldn't appreciate it if they knew you were gay. And so I was never told that I was going to be segregated because of my sexual orientation, but it seemed like a peculiar coincidence. And what led me to become more galvanized in this idea was that later I was told that I didn't need to be in isolation because I needed medication. I was taken to another cell where I was again on my own, and then they put me in another cell with people, and I said, but if you put me in with other people, does that then mean that I'm not going to get my medication? And they said, you don't need to be in isolation because you get medication. So, you know, was there a nefarious plot? I don't know. Was it just mass uncoordination? I don't know. But it was really disturbing. I mean, even to the degree that they were walking, the police officers and guards were walking up and down the aisles, calling out the names of people they wanted to remove from a cage, but they obviously had no idea where these people were, because they were just calling the names aloud and hoping someone matching that name would answer. And if they didn't even know what cage they'd put them in, I mean, what did that say about the kind of organization of hundreds and hundreds of people in this space? It was a very frightening experience. I was there for about 13 hours. I was released sometime around 1:30 in the morning. I was lucky because they had allowed me to keep my shoes. Most of the people who were being released into the night didn't even have anything on their feet. And it had been raining just before I was released. And if there hadn't been a small group of people across the street who were actually helping detainees as they were released, then I probably would have had to have walked home, because a lot of public transit isn't running at that hour, and it's certainly not running in that part of town. And moreover, I didn't have any money on me, so I would have been in a bit of a pickle. So 13 hours, during which I was never told why I was arrested, during which I was never told that I had the right to speak to counsel. I did ask to speak to counsel. I did ask to speak to a lawyer. I asked to have access to a telephone. I was never given an answer. And other isolated things happened. Like one time I was trying to lie down in my isolation cell, and I guess I looked asleep. Two officers went by and they said, we should kick her while she's asleep. And I guess it's that kind of comment that was it really captured a bit of the essence of the experience, which is that everything about the police conduct was so egregious. It was just unnecessary. I mean, why would you volunteer that you would want to kick someone who's handcuffed and alone in a cell and lying on a cement floor? And why would you even say that, even if you thought it, why would you say that aloud to your colleague and say, we should kick her because she's asleep? We could, I mean, what's the point of that? How is that justifiable? You know, and then the stories I heard from talking to other people, it was, you know, even the fact of being pushed to the ground when I was arrested by 3 police officers, had they walked up to me and put their hand on my shoulder and said, okay, you're under arrest, put your hands behind your back, I wouldn't have resisted. Because as I said, I know that that can get you into even worse trouble. I would have complied. It was so completely unnecessary. And even the fact that we were leaving the scene at the time that we were arrested, how could we have been committing any kind of offense if we were trying to obey their directions to leave? There was a lot of mobilizing after the G20 ended, and I connected with other journalists who had stories, and the issue of the press credentials came up a lot, and it was kind of debated in the media itself about who's a legitimate journalist and who's not, and so it tended to hinge around what kind of credentials you had and issued by whom. And after speaking at a rally one time, a journalist who I believe was from Reuters came to speak to me privately after I'd spoken to a crowd, and he still had on his G20 press credentials, and I guess they were issuing 2 kind of sets of credentials. For the international media, there was quite a large document in a big holder, and then for smaller organizations, I guess, such as the one that I was representing, we had access to other kinds of resources, but not, you know, direct press conferences with people present. We had it, you know, it was kind of a step back. But this journalist was fully credentialed, and he was, even though it was a week after the G20, he still had his press credentials on, and he started crying as he was talking to me, and he said that he had seen his cameraman dragged away by the police, but that he himself hadn't been arrested. And he held up his press credentials and he said, what was the point of getting credentials? And he felt so helpless and so upset that he had tears running down his face as he was talking to me, because he felt so helpless watching his cameraman being dragged away. All the footage that I had taped, which had been from the moment that I had arrived on the scene, I'd been videotaping throughout, right up to the moment of my arrest. All that footage was erased. Everything on my video camera was erased. And I didn't realize it right away, but they'd actually taken the memory card out of my still camera as well. So I had no documentation remaining, no footage remaining of what had happened on the scene. The journalist who was in the back of the cruiser, we learned, had been shot with a conducted energy weapon like a taser, after he told police that he had a pacemaker, and a police officer lifted his shirt from the waist up and said, "You don't have any scars." But he looked at my colleague's belly, not at his chest. And so once he had been shot with this weapon, his heart went into this really fast, dangerous speed, and they had to take him to emergency. And none of us were charged with anything. I was told when I was released that I had been in breach of the peace, and I had to agree not to go to any further G20 related demonstrations or I would be rearrested and charged criminally. From the counsel that I have spoken to since then, the belief is that that's not actually a legal thing for the police to do, to impose that kind of condition on me when I was being released without being charged. It's not like it was a bail condition or anything. I was just being released. So, 13 hours, no telephone, my hands cuffed the entire time, barely anything to drink, not knowing why I was arrested, not having any charges. It was a fiasco. And I think it's important to recognize that, again, another public debate is the question of who is a protester, who's a bystander, and if you are a passerby and you have a video camera, does that make you, in fact, a journalist? But what I found happening was that these newer lines were being drawn by the police themselves, which was if you are a journalist and you are there reporting on what's happening, you are not simply doing your job as a journalist. You are now taking part in something which is allegedly illegal. Somehow you are now a participant. Somehow you are now suspect, because other journalists, a number of other journalists, were arrested. I had proper credentials. I obeyed the police. I did my job as a good journalist should. I asked questions. I didn't just immediately fall over and get the heck out of there. It's my job to ask questions. It's my job to persist and find out what's going on so that I can tell the public what's happening, especially if there are no larger news outlets nearby. Who else is going to report these stories? But clearly, I mean, certainly the impression that I was left with was that that kind of reporting was not acceptable from the G20 security perspective, that somehow I was a threat because I was a reporter.